Alright guys, hey, welcome, and here we are going to get started with another video lesson. If you missed the live session, this is where we are going to get started. So, the title, Regions of the British Colonies. That's our title, our objective. We're going to explain how and why environmental and other factors shape the development and the expansion of the British colonies from 1607 to 1754. Here are key terms. The big brain question I want you to think of for the day, why did these colonies develop so differently if they're all on the same Atlantic coast? So keep that in mind. Why are these colonies developing differently? Now, moving forward, don't worry about the do now. Just remember, we'll call back from yesterday when we talked about Pilgrims and Puritans. Think about some of the differences. One thing before we get into lesson stuff, here is the AP Classroom class code. Make sure you go on to College Board, onto AP Classroom, and join the course. You're going to be working in this very, very soon, so do yourself a favor, get on here already so you're not missing assignments later on. Alright? Now, here's our title and our objective that we've already covered. Key point 1. Let's go ahead and get started with key point 1. And like normal, like I say, if you need time to write, pause after my explanation or right before I start, pause the slide, get the info down, and then move forward. But for the slides that have information, wait till I finish. I'll even give you a warning, like, all right, pause now because I'm going to move on, because you don't need to write everything word per word. I don't want your hands falling off. So I'll let you know what to write as I explain, and then you can pause it so you can get it down and then move forward. So, New England colonies, initially settled by the Puritans and the Pilgrims, developed around small towns with family farms and achieved a thriving mixed economy of agriculture and commerce. So they farmed small scale, and they had a lot of commerce, which is like trade. So that's something to keep in mind. So go ahead and pause here for key point 1, because I'm going to move forward. First colony we're talking about is Rhode Island. Now, we talked about Plymouth, the hook there on Massachusetts, right here, and we talked about Massachusetts Bay Colony. So we're not going to talk about those today. We already talked about them yesterday. So Rhode Island was founded by Roger Williams, and the idea of Rhode Island's right here, little green one right here. And it was based on the idea of separating the church and the state, which was a new idea at the time. It was something people hadn't thought of yet. So that's what that system was set up for. Now, someone else of note that you need to keep track of, Anne Hutchinson. She's right here. She helped Roger Williams establish Rhode Island. Both of them were considered Puritan dissenters, which means they were kicked out of Massachusetts Bay Colony for breaking the rules. Roger Williams was somebody who questioned the Puritan government a lot, and Anne Hutchinson's only crime was that she wanted to preach, and back then being a woman and preaching was considered heresy, so they did not allow that. So what do you need on this slide? You need founded by Rhode Island, founded by Roger Williams, based on the idea of separation of church and state, helped by Anne Hutchinson. So go ahead and pause here so we can move forward. Next one is Connecticut. Founded by Thomas Hooker, who was also kicked out of Massachusetts Bay Colony for being a dissenter. As bad as it sounds, the easiest way to remember this, the Hookers are in Connecticut. Thomas Hooker founded Connecticut, and he also created the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, which is the first true and strong constitution in the colonies. We talked about the Mayflower Compact being like a baby sort of pre-constitution. The Fundamental Orders are a real constitution. They're the real deal. It is an actual thing. So Connecticut, founded by Thomas Hooker, they created the first constitution, Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. All right, go ahead and pause here because I'm going to move to the next one. All right, New Hampshire. Another breakaway colony from the NBC. By the way, when I say breakaway colony, I mean people left Massachusetts Bay Colony and founded these new ones. It's a lot of the same base of people. Now, New Hampshire is pretty much exclusively a breakaway colony. Massachusetts Bay, if you remember the last lesson, very strict, no privacy, really intense rules, really intense on religion. So people got sick of that. They didn't want to live there. So what they would do is they would leave. And basically that's what New Hampshire is. It's people leaving Massachusetts Bay and forming their own colony up north. So that is where New Hampshire was founded by. A lot of the second and third wave Puritans that came on the ships afterwards are the ones that were like, nah, and they couldn't handle it, and they would leave and form their own colony. So New Hampshire, breakaway colony, and it is the northernmost of the New England colonies. And you can just put that it was formed by people who didn't want to live in the strict lifestyles of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So go ahead and pause here because we're going to move on to our next key point. I said at the top, today's notes are short and they're going to move a little bit fast. So key point 2, the middle colonies supported a flourishing export economy based on cereal crops, grains, not cereal like Cinnamon Toast Crunch, grains, and attached a broad range of European migrants, leading to societies greater cultural, ethnic, and religious diversity and tolerance. So basically, the middle colonies ended up having really good shipping because they had a lot of natural ports. They were really great at growing grains like wheat and barley and things like that. They'll eventually be called the breadbasket. And a lot of European migrants from different countries showed up there. And what you saw were societies with a lot of tolerance in there. The Quakers are going to be in the middle colonies, for example. So if you need time on that key point, go ahead and pause because we're going to move on. And we're going to start with New York. New York, right here in the orange, was founded by the Dutch in 1624. And it was originally called New Amsterdam because it was founded by the Dutch. But the English take it over in 1664. No fighting or anything. The English just kind of wanted it. People living there just kind of wanted to be part of England. So the king in 1664 will send over his friend, the Duke of York, to rule over the area. And so the name is changed to New York after the English took it over. And New York is the least democratic colony in the original 13. The Duke of York rules it kind of like a monarch. He's like a mini king himself. So for New York colony, founded by the Dutch, taken over by the English, ruled like a monarch. The colonies have very diverse governments, so just keep that in mind. Ruled like a monarch. All right. Oh, sorry. So if you need this, pause it, and then we're going to move forward. Next is New Jersey. Really brief New Jersey. This is the yellow one right here. All you need to know for New Jersey, it was formed initially as a place for Quakers to congregate. Quakers are a religious group. They're one of the first groups to establish an anti-slavery society. They're the first abolitionists in the New World. So you need to get the definition for Quakers, and you need to know that New Jersey was founded as a place, it was founded by Quakers, and it was just a place where a lot of Quakers hung out. So I'll leave it here for you to pause. Again, New Jersey, place full of Quakers, and then get the definition for Quakers. All right, and now we go to Pennsylvania, founded by a guy named William Penn, who was a Quaker. It was founded on this strange idea of tolerance, and I'm not kidding. It's kind of seen as an experiment by some of the people, where they say, what if we just let all sorts of different people with different beliefs and religions move here, and just kind of let them live and leave them alone? It's like a proto-melting pot. It's like an early version of a melting pot. So for Pennsylvania, I want you to get William Penn, founder, founded on the idea of tolerance. And you put there like early or first melting pot, if you know melting pot, which is just like cultures mixing together. Then get the definition for middle colonies. All of these middle colonies had really good soil and became known as the breadbasket colonies that produced large amounts of grain. So you do need this last bullet point. So if you need time on that, go ahead and pause it because we're going to move on to our third and last key point. So here we are at key point 3. The colonies of the southern Atlantic coast and the British West Indies, which don't worry too much about the West Indies, but they're there, use long growing seasons to develop plantation economies based on exporting staple crops. So cash crops, essentially. So the economies in the southern colonies are going to be based on cash crops. They depended on the labor of enslaved Africans and often constituted the majority of the population, meaning that most of the time the population was almost exclusively enslaved people. As tragic as it is and as true as it is. And these areas developed their own forms of culture and autonomy. They were truly their own little weird place. They're very different from the other colonies. But we're going to get into them now. So if you need time on the slide, go ahead and pause, because we're going to move on and start with Maryland. Maryland was founded by Lord Baltimore as a refuge for the Catholics. If you remember, being a Catholic in England or in the colonies was not a very good idea. It was not popular. There was a lot of anti-Catholic feelings in the air. So Lord Baltimore was given the permission to found a colony as a refuge for these Catholics. Mary Tudor, who herself was very Catholic in belief, passed the Toleration Act. This act allowed Catholics to move to this colony without fear of persecution. So Catholics can move to say, I'm moving to Maryland, I'm Catholic, sorry, I'm leaving. and not have to worry about getting like set on fire in England. They could go and freely move to Maryland and start their life there. So Maryland, Lord Baltimore, safe place for the Catholics. So that's what you need for this slide. Go ahead and pause now, since we're going to move on to the Carolinas. The Carolinas. So, these colonies developed what's called a fundamental constitution of Carolina, which was based on John Locke's ideas, John Locke's principles, the things that Jefferson's going to borrow for the Declaration of Independence. These guys were already using them. The Carolinas will develop rice and indigo as their major cash crops, unlike Virginia, which is Jamestown, which developed tobacco. So this means that the Carolinas are going to have a super heavy dependence on African slaves right away, because African slaves that have been working in the West Indies know how to deal with rice and indigo. So they need them brought over there. So the Carolinas will develop slavery sooner due to their rice and indigo crops. And you can put the Carolinas government borrowed John Locke's ideas for the Carolinas slide. So we're going to move on to our last info slide and our last note slide, which is Georgia. Georgia was founded by a guy named James Oglethorpe. This colony was established as a buffer between Spanish Florida down here and England everywhere else, the Carolinas, right? Now, it was also developed as a place for debtors. A debtor is somebody who owes money. And when you owed money back then, they threw you in jail. So periodically, England would clean out their jails and ship them over to Georgia. So you got to keep that in mind. Now, one last thing to mention, religious evangelists would convert the local natives that will eventually develop along the whites and be known as the 5 civilized tribes. So we're going to talk a little bit about them way later on, in about 100 years, but I'm going to mention them right now and talk about them. So if you need info on the slide, you need Georgia, founded by James Oglethorpe, buffer between England and Spain, colonies, and a place for debtors. You can put that they converted the natives as well. So just get a little bit from everything. Go ahead and pause here, because I'm going to move on to a blank slide with no more notes, but we're going to talk about the 5 civilized tribes a little bit. So, 5 civilized tribes are the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Creek, the Chickasaw, and the Seminole. These tribes were converted very early on by religious people in the Georgia colony. And when they were converted, they started to grow with and adapt like the whites did. They learned English. They started to farm instead of hunt. They lived in traditional homes. They stayed in one place. These people basically adapted and became a lot like the whites that came there. They lived like the whites. That's why they called them the civilized tribe. As insulting of a name as that is, they were called that because they lived and practiced and acted like the whites did. And the only thing that these tribes did that whites could point at and say that's not right is they were sovereign nations that owned their own land. And in about 100 years from this day, when this is established and this starts happening, a guy named Andrew Jackson's going to have a big problem with this, and he's going to do a lot of the work in getting these tribes to lose their lands. And we're going to get there soon. We're going to talk about it, and we're actually going to break down some of the stuff Jackson did. But he is going to basically have a problem with the fact that these are sovereign nations in the United States. And we're going to get there when we get there. I don't want to spoil too much, and I'll leave it up to you guys when we talk about it, what you think about what Jackson did. But know that these tribes did everything that was asked of them and more, and became prominent members of society. Some of them, as bad as it sounds, like some of them they were indistinguishable from some of these whites. They owned slaves, they did all that stuff. And in the end, it still didn't matter. So we will talk about them as we go along. So that's it for the notes, guys. And again, you didn't need to write anything about the civilized tribes down, just the Georgia stuff. Our exit ticket. If you're watching this video, it means you weren't at the live session. Message me on Teams so I can send you the way that you're going to do this. But essentially, it's numbers 1 through 13 with the 3 colors on a response and a message. So just message me on Teams, and I'll send you the image you're going to use. Thanks, guys. If you need anything, you know how to find me. I'll see y'all in class when you get there.